And our special guest today is Vera Kichanova. Joining us on this episode as a co-host with me is the Right Honourable Steve Baker, a well-known advocate for economic freedom and deregulation. Of course, Steve has been a strong voice in government on issues like free markets.
We need to create the great diversity of governments for the great diversity of people. My favorite story of a free city actually comes from Ukraine. It's the city of Odessa on the Black Sea. It was a Porto Franco, and it was the Hong Kong or Dubai of its time. It was like a dusty village. It was a challenge to find drinking water, and 10 years later, it was one of the richest trading hubs in Europe.
If there's really the possibility of a renewal of Ukraine and a rebuilding of Ukraine through some social entrepreneurs investing in creating private cities, that could lead to Ukraine showing the world the way to go. If we could get onto a basis where our society is run through those who govern having to satisfy the voluntary preferences of those who are governed, wow, day by day, that could be incredible if people are actually opting into being in a place and can, leave to somewhere distinctly different because there are competing cities. That could be a really transformational innovation and certainly could liberate business forces to make society more progressive, actually, and more prosperous.
Free private cities could be an opportunity to create a true level playing field where people can come and prosper without feeling that they're swimming against the tide.
Billionaires who would otherwise need security around the place don't need it in Monaco, because if somebody were to try and abduct them for a ransom, then they would soon meet an end in Monaco.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to The Resilient Compass. So today we're diving into the world of cities, but just not any city. We're talking about private cities, we're talking about startup cities and special economic zones. And our special guest today is Vera Kichanova. She's a total expert on this. She's got a PhD on the subject. She's written a ton about it, including the insightful Institute of Economic Affairs paper called Beyond Free Ports, and is even turning her research into a book. Vera, welcome.
Thank you very much, Jason. Thank you for having me here today.
Oh, it's a pleasure. And normally I'd be joined by co-host Andy Schachman, the bullion baron himself, but he's off skiing this week. Lucky guy. But that's not all. So joining us on this episode as a co-host with me is the Right Honourable Steve Baker, a well-known advocate for economic freedom and deregulation. Of course, Steve has been a strong voice in government on issues like free markets and financial reform, making him the perfect guest to weigh in on our conversation of private cities and special jurisdictions. Welcome back, Steve.
Jason, I'm absolutely delighted to join you and have this chance to step into Andy's shoes, and on such an important podcast too, because I think what Vera has to say is really important and could offer us a really important opportunity to develop as a country. So I'm really excited about this conversation.
Great. So if you've wondered what cities of the future could look like, or why some places seem to thrive whilst others get stuck, this podcast for you. So Vera, let's get straight into it. Let's start with the basics. What got you interested in cities, and were you always into this subject?
I would say so, yes. I grew up in a big city, and I've always had this sense that all the most interesting, exciting things are happening in cities. Politics is happening in cities. Economics is happening. Economic growth, innovations. People meet other people. Ideas get exchanged. Goods and services get exchanged. So, yes, cities are these hubs, these laboratories for innovation, for trialing all the new things. And as I said, I grew up in a big city, which was Moscow. I was, at the age of 20, I was elected to a local council. I became the first ever elected libertarian in Russia. And I had to put my convictions to test and figure out how my beliefs in unconstrained innovation and free markets, like what kind of policies they translate into when you deal with day-to-day urban issues. So that is, I could say, how my journey started. I went on to study urban policy and urban development. And as you mentioned, I wrote a PhD on private cities because I got fascinated through research and through looking what works and what doesn't. I got fascinated about cities that start from scratch, startup cities, as they say. So because, I started from trying to kind of find ways to fix existing cities. And it's not that they are unfixable. Obviously, there are policies that work, policies that don't. But we'll need a lot of new cities in the 21st century, especially in the developing world, but not only. And this is the way to kind of leapfrog to trial different policies without being entangled by the interest groups, by the old ways of doing things, so to say.
Are you enjoying the show? A quick reminder then to hit the subscribe button so you can be kept up to date about future episodes. Now, back to the show. So, if you had to explain what a private city is, it's one of the things we're going to talk about today. If you had to explain that to a 10-year-old, not that our viewers all have the mental capacity of just a 10-year-old, but if you could really simplify it for us all, how would you do that?
That's a good one. I think I would say, remember you went to Disneyland. You paid for a ticket, you entered, and you had fun all day long, and all the streets and areas were well maintained, and you had great time. It was secure, it was safe. Would you like to would you like to live in a place like that? What if you don't have to go home? In the end of the day, what if you could stay and live in Disneyland? And I'm sure that a 10-year-old would be very much captivated by this idea. But on a serious note, this is the way that I would sell with tweaks this to adults as well, because we have all encountered different examples of, so to say, islands of urban planning. Those can be university campuses, resorts, theme parks like Disneyland, but not only, innovation hubs, techno clusters, shopping malls, and so on. So we have all been to these places. We've all enjoyed, we benefit from the existence of these places, but we never take a second to think how this place came to be, how they governed. And so this is kind of the idea, is to build on it and expand these islands of private planning to the size of a city.
So Vera, this is such a fascinating idea to take what works and scale it up. But what would you say is the sort of minimum viable smart city? How big would it need to be to work? Would it need to be, say, the size of London? Quite a lot smaller? Does it just need to be sort of a town that gets set free, or do you need to start entirely from scratch with Nero? So what's the minimum viable city that you could envisage?
Well, definitely not the size of London. That is the mistake of a lot of big thinkers, big visionaries who think that, we will build a new London overnight. You don't build cities overnight. You need time for trial and error to trial some things. You need to kind of the seed population, as we call it, you need to bring people into something that's still sort of basically a construction site. You need to attract them somehow. You need to attract industries. You need to see what works, what doesn't, what kind of industries and other anchor kind of tenants attract people. And all of this is not done overnight. So cities should grow organically. Of course, as a planner, you pre-plan some sort of a basic infrastructure, basic zoning, but the more flexible it is, the better. Yes, if we believe in market and that competition between cities bring about best results, then there should be a room for competition inside a city as well. So I wouldn't name any numbers, because even the definition of a city, if you look throughout the countries, it's actually quite funny that in Denmark there is a city which had just a few few dozens of people, and it's considered a city. And in China, anything below, as far as if I'm not mistaken, 100,000 is basically a village. So, yeah, it's not about numbers. It's about creating a viable place, a place where people not just work. So it's not the special economic zones of the past. They started as industrial zones. So there are single industry special economic zones. The cities of the future must be mixed use, as we call it in urban planning. So they have places where people work and places where people go when they finish working.
So I was just fondly remembering going to Hong Kong many, many years ago when the Royal Air Force was still there. It must have been about 1990. I was a very young man. And Hong Kong seems to me quite a successful example, and not strictly a private city. But could you tell us about historical examples of where there have been cities of the kind you envisage, and tell us, how did they work out?
Yeah, Hong Kong exactly is a great example. It's not a private city, but it's a city that has been run as a business, and that's why it achieved such a impressive success. It's within a single generation. It's grown from a humble fishing village into the global trading, financial, industrial hub. And this is what free trade is doing. This is what the power of special jurisdictions, how it works. And as for the purely or semi-private cities that are private to some extent, there are multiple, and depends on how far we want to go down in history. They were private cities. Well, I don't want to talk a lot about the medieval stuff, because these lessons are less applicable to us today. But in the 19th century, in the industrial revolutions, there were many private cities, both in the UK and in the US, company towns, as they were called in the US, model villages, as they were called here in the UK. And that's a very interesting, fascinating story, because it shows you that what's behind those cities is sort of a blend of motivation, but it's obviously the developers wanted to make profit. So they created these cities where they would place their workers next to a mill or next to a factory. But they also had this humanitarian mission in mind. They wanted to create a model for the city of the future. They wanted to create a well-planned, a well-designed place which would greatly improve the living conditions of the workers. And we are talking about places like Port Sunlight. This is some of our viewers might have seen it in the Peaky Blinders show. That's where Aunt Polly's house was located. It's a beautiful Victorian, very picturesque village, and it was all built privately. And imagine you are a factory worker and suddenly you get offered a place like this to work. It was a huge change to the better for people working at those factories. They were often designed by the leading designers of their time, like for example, a Croydon was designed by George Gilbert Scott, and Port Sunlight was inspired by the arts and craft movement by William Morris. So those were the real pioneers of their era.
Can I just drill in on that, because you said something so important, that one of the objectives of the founders was to improve the conditions of working people.
Yes.
And that's so important, because the socialists, they always have utopian dreams, but they never seem to work. But I think you're telling us that private entrepreneurs wanted to drive up the conditions of their workforce, and so they established these cities.
Yeah, it's a curious thing that in parallel to these company towns, there was a socialist experiment inspired by Charles Fourier, the phalansteries throughout the UK. So he was one of the original utopian socialist thinkers, and inspired by his ideas, there was a wave of, so to say, phalansteries, these communities that were actually, they were private cities in a way that they were ran as joint stock companies, but within these borders, they were obviously socialist bubbles, and most of them, they failed spectacularly.
That's so interesting.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I've got no objection to socialism as long as I don't have to pay for it. But you're telling us that socialist enclaves failed, and that's so interesting. So can I just change tack with Jason's permission as well, just to ask you a bit about what would be the scope of the law within a private city? Is it complete? Would a private city, suppose we had such a city in the UK, would it adopt the criminal law of the UK, but then have its own commercial law? Freedom of regulation, no planning law. What would be the scope of the law that would be required to make a smart city, a private city work?
That's a great question. And in my view, it greatly depends on the institutional context of the so-called host country, the country where we're creating an enclave like this. Because if we talk about countries that grapple with institutional failure, with big safety problems like Honduras, the place where the most exciting private cities experiment is undertaken right now, then it is, having your own law, having an independent security system, police system is a great part of the package that you're offering the future residents and the investors, because this is the only way you can detach, you can circumvent your project, circumvent your city from the corrupt system that's got the country into the place where it is. So that's why the Honduran private cities, they have adopted the English common law. One of them, Prospera, even allows, so you move in, you sign what they call the agreement of coexistence, which is essentially a social contract. We all heard at the political theory classes about the social contract that we were supposed to have signed, kind of trading part of our liberties in exchange for security and some institutional things, and we never signed it. But private cities take it to that, like they make this thing, the social contract, a literal thing. You actually sign a social contract. So that's the most important thing about, if I want our listeners to remember one thing about private cities, that's it. No one is forced to join it. That's a paramount thing. It's not supposed to be built on a land that's like where somebody lives who doesn't want to join it. So it must be a greenfield development, and everyone who joins it should join voluntarily. And yes, the idea is that you sign this actual, not metaphorical social contract, and by doing so, you subject yourself to the arbitration mechanism, or you can, as I said, in Prospera, the Honduran private city, you can choose the arbitration mechanism. The two sides can choose, say, the British common law, or they can choose another country's law. They can go to a private arbiter. But this is just one way of doing it. So, as I said, ultimately, this is about competition between different models. We don't know, there's no one-size-fits-all company business. And similarly, there's no one-size-fits-all urban model. We will only figure out what works better through competition. And there's no such thing as, the objectively the best private city, because we have to, as a friend of mine, Jock Work, who is the seasteading pioneer, says, we need to create the great diversity of governments for the great diversity of people. Because yes, we acknowledge the diversity. Different people expect different things from the place where they live, from the people that surround them. and it's about giving people choice. So the private cities is a win-win-win situation. It's for the countries, it brings economic growth. For us as potential residents, it gives us more choice of rules that we want to be governed by. And for the society, for the humanity as a whole, if I may say, it accelerates competition between institutions. It helps us to find the most efficient and pleasant models of living together.
So, Vera, I mean, we were talking a bit earlier about how a lot of these earlier pre-private towns and villages were set up, for the benefit of the workers. And Steve's just talked a little bit about that, and that's fascinating. But a lot of these, new private cities, we're talking about Hong Kong. It sounds very glamorous. And of course, when I actually lived in Hong Kong the same time you were there, Steve. I was there in 1991 as a young architect, and but I mean, how does this model deal with the vulnerable? How does it deal with people who maybe lose their job and for a period of time are without, or who get older and are no longer in work? How does the model look after those people?
There are multiple stories, examples. My favorite one is, for example, the city of Lavasa in India. It's a city that was built completely privately, managed privately under the special jurisdiction status. In that case, it's called the hill stations. It has the hill station status, and the developers, they needed to buy land from the farmers. They were living there, and the farmers were living in poverty, and they didn't use the developer had connection to the, and most projects like that, the developers just end up using their political clout to expropriate land. But they took 10 years to buy this land piecemeal so there were over 1,000 transactions, and so they made sure, and besides the monetary compensation, they were offering these farmers jobs in this future city, because they wanted to create the tourist hub. They wanted to create just a nice place to live, because big Indian cities, unfortunately, are not nice places to live, many of them. And so a lot of urban issues, urban plagues that we are talking about when we talk about cities, they're taken to the next level in countries like India, where urbanization is not keeping up with the growth of urban population outstrips like the provision of goods. So, and all these people, they give their land, and in exchange they got not just money, but they got jobs. Their kids got free education, including in English. They got the first hospital in the area. And so, because it's, as I said, it's a win-win situation. The developer wanted the land, and they wanted the community that would be, they would live there, that would help them create a city. And then the NIMBYs came. NIMBYs, people who have no stake in the development, but they just have this vague idea that private cities are evil. And there was a political movement that started campaign against Lavasa. And the local people were campaigning in defense of Lavasa. They were going to rallies, they were writing petitions, they were saying, these people don't represent us. They say that they are speaking on behalf of the indigenous people and protecting our rights. And but they say, no, this Lavasa gave us life. It gave us homes, it gave us jobs, it gave us education and training, and they don't represent us. There are 2,000 of us, and they're just couple dozens of them, but they know how to use social media. They know how to use, traditional media. So, but the city was still stalled under environmental pretexts for about 10 years. And the residents kept campaigning and, fighting and fighting and fighting, and it was finally revived. So it's not a finished story, but this is one of the stories showing you how, things on the ground are exactly like completely, do not match with this media narrative that it's all about exploitation. It's about kicking out indigenous people and building a gated community for the rich. And in Honduras, another case, so I talked about Prosper. There is another private city called Morazan. It's what the developer calls it a blue collar private city, because it's for the lower middle class and working class population. It has nothing to do with a gated community. It's basically a city where, like, it's being built in Choloma, which is one of the most dangerous places on earth outside the war zones. And yeah, it provides jobs to people who,
One thing I know for sure is that decent working people want to live in a place that is safe and prosperous to bring up their children, just like everybody else. I come from a working class background, and I am well familiar that blue collar workers want a decent place to live, and it's great to know that somebody is out there providing a private city for them to live in. But just thinking about the UK, and you've made it very clear that it needs to be a greenfield site, and I'm just trying to work out how we could do it in the UK, because it doesn't sound like we're going to have a referendum in High Wycombe to make High Wycombe a private city. I don't think it would be one, unfortunately. But what would we do in the UK, and where might one put one of these cities in the UK?
That's a big question, and I wanted to hear your opinion on that, because you're so experienced in the UK politics, and you probably would have some suggestions. But now the Labour government is announcing this new towns, for example, the new towns policy. And as I'm joking, like, just as the free ports that we had from the previous governments are not really free, this new towns policy is not really new. It's building up on what they call a proud legacy of the post-war new towns program. But in my view, there's not that much to be proud of, because these purpose-built cities, they are, if you look at this, what they're proposing now, it's about cherry-picking places, cherry-picking industries, creating a committee to oversee another committee, and just disregarding, sidelining completely the demand where we need these new places. But my point is that if there is a move like that, if there is a move from the top down that we need to build new cities, then at least learn from the best experiences, not from the policies that didn't bring about what was promised 50 years ago.
Yeah. So as I listen to you, I think that the UK is so tightly space constrained that that we'd struggle to find a place to do it as a greenfield site. There's more space in Scotland, but I don't see the Scottish National Party approving of us doing it there. So I was thinking, well, how much space do we need? Where could we put it? We probably could find somewhere where it was possible to buy the land from farmers to set somewhere up. But the next question, because I have some experience of this, of working with Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs during the Brexit process, and we did talk about free ports. And let me tell you, the institutions of the tax-raising state are not very keen on free cities. They sometimes talk about the need for borders and boundaries around them. They'll talk about smuggling and so on. So I'm wondering whether we would have to have maybe a lower level of ambition in order to get it done in a space-constrained place like the UK. So is there an example, or could it work to have a city that's built so that within the boundaries of the city, for example, there's no planning law, there's building standards, but no planning law, so that within the boundaries you can build what you want to build, and everybody who's there understands that's the way it works. Basically, the situation before the Town and Country Planning Act that came in after the Second World War. And that worked very well, actually, a system of letting people do what they wished with their property. It created the most amazing places in the UK that people really value, places like the town centre of High Wycombe, or Marlow or Henley near me, really beautiful towns, and they weren't planned by officials. So is there some way that we could start, if not exactly with a blank sheet of paper, but have just a really radical liberalisation on a range of issues to enable a big economic flourishing, but in a way that's consistent with the UK's geography?
Politically, it's quite hard to imagine because, as we know, we have a very strong NIMBY movement that is cross-partisan in the UK. A lot of people who don't want to build anything new.
Okay. Just in case people don't know, NIMBY stands for Not in My Backyard. So just especially some of our friends in the US, I don't know if it's a phrase over there, but yeah, not in my backyard. You can imagine what those people are like.
Yeah, in the US they also have bananas. Build absolutely nothing, absolutely near anything. It's like the next level NIMBY. But the source of hope for me is that the YIMBY movement is gaining traction. Yes, in my backyard. And it started in the US, especially in the cities like San Francisco, where this problem with housing regulation has created like real disasters. We've all seen these gloomy pictures of people sleeping on the streets of San Francisco. And it's become, it's grown traction, and there is a YIMBY movement in the UK now. And I consider myself a proud YIMBY, and I've met many in the UK. And what gives me hope is that this movement is also cross-partisan. You can meet people from all parties. Like I know YIMBYs who are conservative, Labour, Green, non-political, who just at some point realized that that urban planning is not a zero-sum game. It's not I win, you lose, or you win, I lose.
So it does seem to me like there's two separate things going on here. One is the fresh start in a private city where there's no way, I think there's no way you'd have planning law of the kind that we have across the UK. You just would not do it that way in a free city. But the other thing is just how do you get the building done in the UK that we need? And my view is the reason that we have NIMBYs is because externalities are imposed on people. That is, when a housing estate goes in, it generates traffic, it generates demand for school places, it generates pressure on hospitals, and it intrudes on people's view and where they walk the dog. These are all externalities which are imposed on people with no benefit. And so I'm in favour of reforms, really quite dramatic reforms to the planning system, to preserve the places we really care about, like areas of outstanding natural beauty and national parks, but otherwise to allow the public to share in the benefits of development. There's a really great book by the Institute of Economic Affairs by Mark Pennington called Liberating the Land, which explains
He was my PhD supervisor.
He was your supervisor?
Yes.
Well, he's a great man, and I'm not at all surprised. But yeah, Mark's book, Liberating the Land, is extremely good and could maybe offer a partway house for a lot of swathes of land in the UK.
Mm-hmm. Planners were the reason I actually, after 6 or 7 years of architecture, actually decided not to go into it, because I thought, well, what's the point? Because I'm never going to be able to build what I think we need to build. But I think that brings me on to another point, which is that, presumably trying to build a sustainable free private city is it a bit like, how are we going to work out how to create a sustainable ecosystem on Mars? In other words, you can't just have one part of the ecosystem working. You need a complete joined up ecosystem with all the different types of constituent parts that make a city work. So you need hardworking people, you need support staff, you need people who provide the food, you need educators, and you kind of need all of these things right and in the right balance to get it going. Is that what's needed? Because that sounds like a really big ask to try and get right first time.
As much as exciting it sounds when you talk about the colonization of Mars, I wouldn't compare it with private cities, because if you talk about colonizing Mars or about things like seasteading, there are, on top of political challenges and economic challenges, there are also technical challenges. You need to invent something that's not been invented.
Sure.
You need engineers. When we talk about new cities, everything has already been invented. We know how to build roads. We know how to build houses. We know how
Yeah.
to build public spaces. So I don't want to kind of reinforce this idea that this is something utopian and something from a distant future. So, but
It's just
you are right that you need to think about a lot of things. If that's your question, that you need to lot about a lot of things at the same time, and all these things are interdependent. So even if we remove the political challenges, and if we only think about economic challenges, they are still huge. It's a huge project which requires massive upfront cost, a lot of thoughtful planning. As I said, you need to bring people to what's still a construction site. You need to offer them something. But if you look at the amount of people who are immigrants, who are leaving places where they were born in search for a better life, who are risking their lives by taking a boat and going on a precarious journey, you see that you could think that probably they would be very happy if offered a better place to live at home where they are. So about 10% of Honduran populations are living in the US, many of them illegally. So the private cities could offer an alternative instead of getting away from everything going away from everything you used to, everything you love, your family. You could move to a city nearby, live in safety, make a living, get better life for your kids, better than the one you had.
So you're talking really a free private city, more like the people setting this up are creating the infrastructure, they're creating the matrix, and then because it's free of regulation, the market then acts as the regulator. Of course, if we're setting up a city on Mars, you've got to think it all perfectly in advance because you can't change it once it's left Earth. It needs to go there. You need to have everything that needs to be in it go off at the beginning. But with this, you're setting up a free matrix. And if I'm an entrepreneur and I find out that there's a new private city that's just been set up on a brownfield site on the edge of a post-industrial city, and I hear that they don't have a currency system that's independent, and I'm going to rush off there with glint and tell them, hey, I can provide this solution. And that's the same whether it's for, if there's a gap for restaurants, a gap for artists, a gap for lawyers, those people will move there and fill the vacuum, and therefore you don't need to get it all perfect at the beginning. But I suppose it's a bit like setting up a shopping center. Those shopping center developers want to get the correct key cornerstone vendors in there at the beginning to get people going. So yes. I suppose the magic, I'm guessing, is an infrastructure which has some of those key elements inside it, but you don't have to work out the whole thing perfectly. Is that right?
Yes. So there is no, again, as I said, there is no one size fits all model. So you can't say in advance what level of pre-planning you need in a city, and you can have different cities. Some of them very, very neatly planned. Some of them more open to the free flow of sub-developers filling up the spaces. But yeah, the rule of thumb is that there needs to be room for trial and error, room for bottom-up innovation. But
Vera, I have thought of a country. I've thought of a country with absolutely loads of space in it. A country that there's air to breathe, there's water to drink, and that country is, of course, Russia. Now, you said earlier that you were the first libertarian elected in Russia. What are the chances of Russia coming to its senses after Putin and Russia making available space to have private cities which are independent within that territory? What do you think?
That's a really hard question. And if you want me to provide some sort of optimism about the future of Russia, then I'm afraid I don't have any. I left Russia more than 10 years ago. My family is from Ukraine, and I moved to Ukraine after the revolution in 2015 to work on the promoting free market reforms in the post-revolutionary environment. So I think that the post-war Ukraine might be a better ground for trying this. And I'm in touch with some Ukrainian social entrepreneurs who have attended our conferences by the Free Cities Foundation and got intrigued by these ideas, and who think that because obviously they will be like a lot of cities were destroyed, and I'm afraid, the destruction is not yet over because the war is going on, but ultimately they will need to be restored. And a lot of people have left, including some members of my family, and many of them will want to come back. So there will be a huge demand for building cities, rebuilding, or even building new cities. And
Vera, that's so huge, and what you've said really brings it home and makes it very real and personal. And it's a huge honor to hear you say about your own experience. And it's
my favorite story of a free city actually comes from Ukraine. It's the city of Odessa on the Black Sea. It was a Porto Franco, and it was the Hong Kong or Dubai of its time. It was like a dusty village where you couldn't it was a challenge to find drinking water. And 10 years later, it was one of the richest trading hubs in Europe. It was the third richest city it was part of the Russian Empire, after obviously St. Petersburg and Moscow, the third city to have an opera. It was Tsar Nicholas the First called it the nest of conspirators, because it was also the center of free thinking. Most of the governors and people in power were foreign experts of the French, the Dutch, the Italians. So it looks like a piece of Italy on the Black Sea. So I can go on forever, because it's my second favorite city after London, probably.
This is huge. This is huge. I mean, if there's really the possibility of a renewal of Ukraine and a rebuilding of Ukraine through social entrepreneurs investing in creating private cities in Ukraine, I mean, that is absolutely huge. I mean, that could lead to Ukraine showing the world the way to go, couldn't it?
Yes, that would be my big dream to help this happen.
Well, if I can help you, I will help you. I mean, that would be an amazing privilege.
And Steve, we've seen already in the US that there seems to be certainly this big explosion in, for the first time in a long time, entrepreneurs and business people getting involved in running a country. I don't know if that's a tide that's turning generally, or whether or not we'll see that happening in other countries or not. But I think that, do you think that's maybe that we could catch that cold here, and that might work in terms of government wanting to deregulate and involve business in how we do things?
Well, I'd love it if it did. Politics and business are different categories of human action. Politics is about harvesting votes, and business about prices, profit and loss. And I think that's one of the intriguing things about Vera's work, is that it's about putting cities on a prices, profit and loss basis, and allowing people to exit if they don't want to be there, they choose to be there. But of course, typically with politics, you don't get much choice, you don't get it very often, and you are stuck with it when you're there. So the dynamic in politics is very, very different. But if we could get onto a basis where our society is run through those who govern having to satisfy the voluntary preferences of those who are governed, wow, day by day, that could be incredible. If people are actually opting into being in a place and can leave to somewhere distinctly different because there are competing cities, that could be a really transformational innovation, and certainly could liberate business forces to make society more progressive, actually, and more prosperous. But within the UK, within the current paradigm, whether we could bring more business people in to help run the state such as it is, I don't know. I think it would require quite a lot of reform. Government departments do have boards. Those boards don't tend to perform the same function as they do in business. Maybe what needs to happen is empower all of those boards, bring serious business people into those boards and say, on you go, reform that department. Maybe that would be an incremental reform that could enable the government that we have to be more directly influenced by business people in the UK. I certainly think it'd be a good thing.
I mean, I seem to recall as I was studying architecture in the late 80s, early 90s, that in France, there was an incredible movement by French mayors to kind of try and outcompete other mayors of other cities. And there was quite an explosion in architecture, for instance, where one mayor was trying to, outdo the next city. And of course, this was for all good reasons. Effectively, what they were doing is developing the brand of the city, and what a better way to do that is through its architecture. But do you think a kind of, we've got, the mayor of Manchester, Andy Burnham, I think he is called, and you've got people in London, the mayor of London and stuff. Do you think I mean, I don't know much about it. Is that an opportunity maybe to try and get something going?
Well, it wouldn't be a fresh start, but it might well be that Andy Burnham could learn a great deal from Vera about what liberalizations could work, But I love the idea of Manchester becoming a free city. But I think the fundamental issue there is if you're converting a city, Vera will know more about this than me, but it just does seem that you'd need to have a referendum. It would have to have a supermajority, because
it wouldn't work.
Once you set about doing it, the people who were there would have to either move out to somewhere else in the UK or put up with it. So,
what about brownfield sites? I mean, there's large areas of post-industrial cities, especially in the north, that still exist, where a lot of the areas are wasteland, and they're still not burgeoning economies, even since those shipbuilding and coal mining industries died. There's still not a lot of vitality there.
This is why I was asking Vera about what the scope of the law would have to be to make it work. Because if one were to pick a brownfield site in the UK, the criminal law would probably have to be the same as everywhere else in the UK. So, for example, on drugs, now there'll be plenty of libertarians who would like to have a liberal regime on narcotics, but it wouldn't be compatible with the United Kingdom's criminal law, and you'd have to have borders. It would probably fall down at the first hurdle if that was proposed. So you probably have to have the same criminal law everywhere, but you could perhaps have a different commercial law, and you could, within that brownfield site, for example, have very radically different regulation. You could have no planning law, but building standards. The building standards could be set locally. So it feels like, to do it in the UK on a brownfield site in the UK, we'd need Vera to do a new project whereby she sort of modularized what could be done. And one would have to legislate that these kind of pick from Vera's modules of the things that you could do in a kind of hierarchy towards freedom, and then you'd maybe have a proposition that you could do on a brownfield site in the UK.
Yes, exactly. So I think that in the UK, I wouldn't expect such cities to have, for example, a separate criminal law, and we don't need it that much as, say, Honduras or Guatemala or Nigeria, where several private cities are under development right now. But yes, there is a very obvious low-hanging fruit, which, as you said, is the housing and planning regulations. So there is a spectrum. Like, it doesn't have to be all or nothing. It doesn't have to be, or either we are building a private city where the government needs a permission to enter, the representatives of the UK government, or nothing will work. There's a spectrum, and there's plenty of things we can try, which will be much more which will be relatively politically feasible, I believe, such as I said, we all know that the housing crisis is one of the most pressing issues, and there have been multiple proposals from multiple parties, multiple non-partisan groups and think tanks and developers on how to fix this. What if we try them all or many of them in different places and see what works better in terms of creating a win-win, as I said, situation, creating cities that are vibrant and growing, but without compromising the beauty and safety and livability of neighborhoods. And brownfield, that can be a way to go. But as I said, most importantly is that you can't create a place where, with good institutions, if you abuse a bad institution in the first place, it has to be, most importantly, the land should be acquired lawfully. It shouldn't be a city like that should not start from using the abuse of eminent domain or expropriation, as it's called in more, by most people. So but that can be brown side if it's not, if it's lawful acquired.
I mean, Vera, one of the things that I'm really kind of cognizant of is the north-south divide. I was born in Sunderland in the northeast of England. I lived there. I used to, I spent some time in, I know what Hartlepool certainly was like in the 70s. And I know what Newcastle and Northumberland are like. And, there's this huge north-south divide between, basically kind of London and just about everything outside it. And of course, I've come to understand and learn that's because of the Cantillon effect, which Steve knows a lot about, which is that those closest to the money supply, i.e. those closest to the banks and this great big hose pipe of free money that's pumped into the economy by the banks and by central banks as well when they do QE, those closest to that money supply benefit disproportionately from those further away. Because those people and those businesses are able to buy assets and companies, and by the time everybody else gets a chance to buy them, then of course those things have gone up in price, and that's inflation. But it just feels like it's felt like for me, and I think a lot of people that I've seen around me and observed, that people just feel that they're swimming against the tide, whilst over there. The have yachts, we're the have nots, and then there's the have yachts over there. They seem to be having no problem making headway. And it seems to me, Steve, that actually this type of thing could be a really great way of trying to sort that out, because effectively, instead of trying to using tax to tax people in London and reappropriate money to somebody else who hasn't got it, and of course that comes with its own moral hazards in terms of, well, who gets it and how do you just put it about? Why not just create a bit of a stimulus, an opportunity for people to create their own wealth on a level playing field? I mean, our vision as a company, my vision at Glint, is a world where everyone has an equal opportunity to prosper. And that doesn't mean that you will. It just means there should be a level playing field. So for me, what gets me excited, Vera, is that, free private cities could be an opportunity to create a true level playing field where people can come and prosper. You work hard and do that without this, without feeling that they're swimming against the tide. But of course, Steve, that's going to need special conditions, and I wonder how you get that balance right, because special conditions could include, for instance, low or zero tax and things like that, which they've done in Dubai. But how do you stop it so that you don't just get every wealthy person in Britain, instead of leaving the country, as a lot of them are doing apparently in troves, all the millionaires are leaving, I'm told. How do you stop them all just coming to this new tax haven that's being created in somewhere in the north of England? I don't know.
Well, that's a very good question. Yeah, because it shouldn't just be a place where people can live in luxury without paying any tax. That's not really the purpose of the United Kingdom. It's more, the purpose of doing this should be, as Vera articulated earlier, that great like your own, where people get a better life. Private sector entrepreneurs of the past trying to create better cities for their workers, and that should be how it was configured. So I think back to, if we were doing it in the UK, really back to those sort of modules that we talked about earlier, one would have to work out what was going to be in this city, and unfortunately, just a little bit of planning about what it was actually going to be, rather than just setting aside some territory with a social contract and letting people go on, because there would be a risk of people just withdrawing to pay no tax. And much as I'm all for lower taxes, we probably couldn't sustain a tax, just a pure tax haven within the UK. It would have to be a productive place. Certainly, I can imagine Revenue and Customs immediately guffawing if somebody suggested just a tax haven in the north of England.
But I mean, how do you? But I mean, you've got somewhere like Monaco sits right in France. I mean, tax-free, or was anyway, for a long time. Sat in France, you just cross over the border, 5 minutes, 10 minutes from the city centre, you're in France. I mean, how come that works?
This is the crazy thing. In the real world, these things work very well indeed. They work very well indeed. Monaco works very well indeed. But I suppose one would just have to ask,
for the wealthy.
Yeah, I mean, I had occasion to go there. And it's great. I mean, there's plenty of policing. I mean, billionaires who would otherwise need security around the place don't need it in Monaco, because if somebody were to try and abduct them for a ransom, then they would soon meet an end in Monaco. And so I understand that for very, very wealthy people, Monaco is very attractive for that reason. I suspect that in the UK, you probably have to have several locations very swiftly and have some variety. You know, I love the idea of that blue collar city, Vera, where people go because they're working class people who want a better life for themselves and their family. And I think within the UK, we'd have to be very careful to find a place that was a fresh start. But for it to be politically sustainable, it definitely would have to be more than a sort of encampment of the ultra wealthy. Otherwise, I think the rest of the country's voters would stamp it out.
Yeah. So maybe it doesn't need any tax incentives, Vera. Is that? I mean, have you looked into this? I mean, is it mainly about the lack of regulation and the freedom to get on with things? I mean, a lot of businesses feel that they're constrained by the overheads of regulation and the constraints of planning.
It can be, different enclaves like that can have different attractors. But as I say, the special economic zones that only built around tax incentives are already not so special economic zones. It's you have to compete with the existing tax havens, as they say. So people who are, as you were talking about, people who have yachts, already have plenty of places to go and live tax-free. It's about people who cannot afford it. It's about giving them the opportunity. So
that is the point.
Yeah,
that is absolutely the point. And I love it when you say it like that. We should leave that out of the blocks all the time, that it's for those who haven't got yachts to have a better chance. Yeah.
Great. Well, listen, Vera, I mean, I think Steve and I could talk to you for the next couple of hours about this and do Joe Rogan style podcast, but I'm sure we've both got things to do. But I just wanted to say ask you to, if anyone's listening who's intrigued by this topic, where's the best place for them to start learning more?
I would suggest the Free Cities Foundation website. We have a great collection of information. We have Titus Gebel's white paper and book, Free Private Cities. I'm writing extensively for them. We are covering what's happening right now in different parts of the world. We have a Free Communities map, which maps these projects, and we are keeping in touch with the developers and residents and updating regularly what's happening, how many people move in, how much money they've raised, all these things. And we have the Free Cities podcast, which all of this is on the free-cities.org. All of this can be found there. So the podcast has we have a great host, Tim Andrews. He has interviewed over 100 people involved in the movement already. And each interview is like an hour, 2 hours. So these are very deep conversations where you can, they debunk a lot of myths. They show you what kind of people are building it, and you see these are not, greedy capitalists who want to reinforce and even worsen the inequalities. These are people with a vision who have, many of them coming from, as you said, underprivileged background, and they just want better lives for people that they know, and they want the human ingenuity to bring about the better lives for everyone.
Well, Vera, thank you so much. I mean, normally on the Resilient Compass, we're talking about, economic sovereignty and freedom of the individual. And of course, what we've been talking today is about resilience through alternative governance and free markets with these cities. And so I do want to say thank you very much for coming onto the show. We actually had Titus Gable on here a few weeks ago. So if you're interested in this, go and look at, I don't know which episode it was, Titus Gable. You can watch the interview we had with him. And Steve, as always, great pleasure for you to come on the show. Thank you so much for standing in. I really appreciate it.
Well,
Vera?
Jason, a real joy to be on the show, and Vera, an absolute joy to meet you. I am now excited about giving Andy Burnham the news that we're turning Manchester into a private city.
Thank you. It's been a great conversation. Thank you, Jason, for inviting me. Thank you for helping me to raise awareness of this silent revolution that's taking place all over the world. And thank you to Stephen for your very insightful comments. And
well, Vera, don't forget when you're talking about this, if you're considering independent and reliable currency, it's not just all about Bitcoin. Of course, gold used as money with glint is the other solution, which of course is tried and tested throughout time and history and space. So that's my simple ask, that you spread that little bit of word for us, and we'll do our bit for you. So thank you very much. If anybody is interested, please find out more about this. This is fascinating. I know all kinds of people who've started thinking about moving to some of these free private cities. They're fascinated by them, and long may the movement continue, and we learn from what's going on in the world. Thank you. And until next time, subscribe if you haven't subscribed already, because that's the only way you'll get to find out when our next episode is.